without further ado, Jeff, thank you so much, and we are ready for you to present. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lynn. Is can everyone see this screen? This is okay? Yeah, there you go. Okay. Yeah, so thanks, Lynn, for that kind introduction, and I'm honored to be here with the different speakers and of course the participants in this event. Um So what I wanted to talk here is essentially our sort of like field notes, right? And observations with what is currently happening here in the Philippines when it comes to EV battery recycling, specifically with waste pickers. So this has been the product of a lot of conversations with waste pickers on the ground, and essentially how we think or rather how they think uh, their place is in the whole ecosystem of EV batteries, right? So yeah, so essentially I'll um, go through the general context of EV batteries here in Asia Pacific, how how they can be complex and a bit different from global discussions. And then I would go to waste picker narratives, what specific stories and experiences these waste pickers have in their in here in Metro Manila, and I would like to end with some reflections on how it is a form of waste colonialism, how a lot of the developments globally does lead to waste colonialism here, especially with waste pickers, and of course how what that relationship is with repair and reuse. So yeah, so I hope that's perfectly fine for everyone. So yeah, let me get jump right in. We know that the Asia Pacific region has been a leader in EV production, but while most battery electric vehicles and hybrids in the region can be found in China, um, I think almost half of the worldwide numbers in EV deployment on the road are in China. What is gaining popularity in other countries, like here in the Philippines, and to a certain extent also India and Indonesia, are two and three wheeler EVs with an estimated value of around 813 million US dollars just last. Okay, so it's quite big, and it is the fastest growing segment of EVs here in the region. And of course, the batteries that are being used here in these two and three wheeler EVs are not your lithium ion batteries, rather they're lead acid batteries. They do dominate the two and three wheeler markets here, and the reason for this domination really is, they're really cheap to produce. Their operating costs are really low. They focus on short range mobility and utility. I think less than 50 miles, because of the needs also of the people using these EVs here. And really the lack of regulation also compared to internal combustion two and three wheelers. For instance, here in the Philippines, you don't need a license to actually operate a two and three wheeler EV here. As long as it's EV, you can be perfectly fine without a license. The government does treat it like a bicycle, you know. So there really is no regulation for EVs, which makes it really attractive for a lot of people. And of course, because of this, informal waste pickers really are at the forefront of, materials recovery from EV batteries. Here in the Philippines and also a lot of global South countries were considered the Wild West in end-of-life management for EV batteries. And the Asia Pacific region is really home to, so-called wildcat recyclers and really highly unorganized and self-trained local vendors, collectors, and scrap dealers, as we will see later. Okay. And of course, the focus here is really the lead acid battery. It is designed specifically for disposal and not repair and reuse, right? Because of, again, cheap production costs, high output capacity, and really the general availability, especially from OEMs, which make, lead acid batteries very very easy to produce at scale, in the in the scale that is needed for two and three wheelers here in the Asia Pacific market. What is also, and I'm sorry that the picture doesn't seem to show, uh what is specific here with lead acid batteries is that there really is an unclear chain of custody for end of life management. For example, here in Manila, because of a lot of informalities when it comes to end of life management for lead acid batteries, it can be pretty difficult to track where these batteries end up in. So for instance, in our field work here in a particular city in Metro Manila called Malabon, um, they do practice battery swapping, and the system is these old lead acid batteries are swapped with new ones, right? And then at some point in the year, a Chinese company who owns or who produces the batteries collects these batteries, and then the trail ends there. Like they're it's pretty difficult to see where these batteries go to, right? So, but of course, these are big stories. But like, what do the waste pickers actually experience on the ground, right? So, um, we do see a lot of occupational hazards here. So we have been documenting reports of electrical and chemical burns. Electrical burns because of the charge inside, chemical burns because of the lead and other chemicals inside. People actually call it dust here in the Philippines. They think that uh, the materials inside the lead acid battery um, take on many forms and kind of like contaminate the environment. So these result in respiratory illnesses for both the youth and the elderly. And there have been instances of deaths as well due to exposure to lead and other chemicals. These workshops, okay, operate in open air settings, and these are in the middle of really really dense urban communities. You have to go inside to walk inside a very very narrow pathway, and then it suddenly opens up to a big open air workshop with so many kids and so many stores and houses all around that workshop in the open air, right? So you could imagine like how this space could be a big question mark when it comes to occupational hazards. There are also cases of environmental leaching in landfills, and of course, because these are waste pickers, they are seen by the state as litterers, and sometimes when they just go around and pick stuff up for waste picking, they actually get uh accosted by police, and they're levied heavy fines. So for example, in this picture, as you can see on the left, this is one of those open air workshops. And you see that it's not just about EV batteries, but electronics in general. They really dismantle stuff um, in the open air, right? And here on the right side is one of those workshops as well in another area here in Manila. Of course, there's also a lack of policy support. There are no safeguards for waste pickers here. We have seen a lot of reports, and these are also being told to us that there's really no support or training, and they're being left to learn in YouTube when it comes to dismantling these batteries. And Because of this, a lot of informal battery buyers are really stepping in amid the reluctance to dismantle these batteries because of the dangers. And these waste pickers actually have a deep understanding, right? That these batteries cannot absolutely go to landfills because of their toxicity. So they do know the environmental impacts of EV batteries. And you can see the pricing here. For example, we got this price list, um, which you see isn't actually very much, right? And yeah, it is based on size, and it is based on the stuff that is extracted from these batteries. So yeah, so it's not much. So, but at the same time, this is way higher than most e-waste that these waste pickers trade. So it remains um, a very attractive a source of income, right? And for its role in just transition, it was interesting in one of our interviews where one of the waste pickers actually said that, and I quote, rather, um, loosely, that he wishes that the government would see them as people that are part of the just transition process, like because they do have an understanding of how to extract metals from different electronics, not just in EV batteries, right? And also they are aware of the lack of inclusion in the larger discussions on critical mineral extraction here, and they do know the value of these critical minerals. So I guess the question here, uh, if it is really just transition, if the electrification and the decarbonization of this sector would push through, uh, who gets affected, in this just transition. Um, this decarbonization and just transition dominates, the conversation globally, of course, because it's one of the top priorities in climate. But again, because of this, it really hides battery issues in plain sight, right? Batteries designed to be disposed for profitability results in a system where most vulnerable sectors actually take on that risk of environmental and social risks in end of life management of these really dangerous batteries, especially for in these vulnerable communities, even vulnerable sectors within those communities, like the elderly and the youth. So we see here, to be able to have uh, a safe and inclusive space for just transition. Um, really, it's very important to have a standardization of parts and a really deep understanding of redesign with battery chemistry, with the thinking that environmental and social impacts should be at the forefront of that design principle, that new design principle, right? And of course, if we do adopt a zero waste framing and policy formulation, would be great. And of course, to necessarily include a lot of our waste pickers in just transition discussions. So yeah, I hope that showed you kind of a quick picture of how it is here, and I would be more than happy to receive your questions later in the Q&A. Thank you.
Yeah, you need that. But
Well, not to waste time, I'll just say, I describe Fix-It Clinic as this hobby of mine that's gotten way out of control. And a week and a half ago, I didn't even know this conference existed. So I'm really honored that you guys would think of having me here as a presenter. I've already talked against that. We can go to slide number 2.
Perfect, but we're gonna go with it, guys. Okay.
Next slide. Oh, do you want me to advance it? All right, I go. All right, guys, we don't have to wait for the crisis. It's already here, right? And so each of us with our, at this point, the lithium-ion batteries in our smartphones, the energy density in here is equivalent to about 2 tablespoons of gasoline. And so lithium-ion battery, someone mentioned the anode and cathode aspects of it before. If it's damaged as a result of, just if anything happens like that, basically it can go into spontaneous thermal runaway and catch fire. And so next slide. That's what happens a lot. All right, literal dumpster fires. The consumer just cavalierly throws away something with a lithium-ion battery in it. And there's so many of these things out there now. I mean, your rechargeable earbuds have 3 of them, 1 in the case and 2 in each ears. So these things are happening more and more. My friend Amy Homs, who runs Burbank Recycling Center, says she's experiencing 3 smoldering fires a week at their municipal reclamation facility. It's having an impact of all sorts because they can't reinsure. Okay, it's threatening the trash pickup of all over the United States at this point. There was a $40 million fire somewhere in the Midwest. There was an $8 million fire at Shoreway Recycling Center on the other side of the bay. Next slide. Well, way before that, we started doing Fix-It Clinics. And what they basically are these events where we set out shared tools. We invite the general public in with their broken items, and we help them, fix them. We have repair coaches, Fix-It coaches who float around the room. But the ideal goal here is not actually repair. Repair is actually a serendipitous side effect of the process. What we're really trying to do is convey generalizable critical thinking and troubleshooting skills. Repair is just something that happens as a result of that. Okay, next slide. It's apolitical, non-denominational, non-sectarian. Everybody's got broken stuff. Everybody can relate. Next slide. We now are global and worldwide through both Zoom. Next slide. And we have Discord. So we can do these hybrid events where we can get global resources, global repair information, and global help. And it's amazing what's out there. I mean, the Belgians are great at electronics. Who knew? And we can basically share in these events, and we can have people have a multiple touch journey through repair. They don't have to come to an in-person event at a library in order to fix their stuff. Next slide. And just to give you a sense of that it is truly global, from the upper left to the lower right, we've been northern New Mexico, Palestine, Scotland, Paris, France, Berkeley, California, Belmont, Massachusetts, London, England, and Melbourne, Australia. Sandeep got up at 5:30 in the morning to get help with his sewing machine. Next slide. During the pandemic, we also expanded to repairing our shared public property and community assets. Now we can scale. Now we can get resources to people in all sorts of places in the world. So these high schoolers are repairing this kitchen stand mixer for their local community food kitchen. And I never met them in person. I gladly signed off on their community service credit because they did the work. Next slide. They also repaired this portable amplifier system for the San Leandro Public Library. Next slide. More and more of our work has to do with digital literacy, digital equity, digital inclusion, and the economic justice issues that you talk about, because we're expected more and more to have our lives depend on these electronic devices. And it's one thing if you lose your family photos because your computer or phone doesn't work. It's another thing to lose your access to banking or your access to healthcare. And as we're asking people to rely on these things more and more in our society, it's incumbent on us to make sure that they work. But right at the moment, they're very, very brittle, and it's getting worse in some way. Next slide. Not just individuals, whole sectors of the economy and commerce are dependent on this. I mean, we think of farmers as being resilient type people. They should be able to fix their own stuff. They're remote. They can't get access to service easily. Next slide. But your modern combine or tractor is such a combination of hardware and software that they can't fix it anymore. They're not even allowed to fix it anymore. John Deere is basically using the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, the same law that keeps you and I from copying music and movies, to enforce the software trademark and copyright on the software on their tractors and not giving it to the farmers. So can't use it. So yeah, keep going. What the hell? This is the Ram truck, which they added. So they're claiming in for security reasons, they don't want to give you this stuff. So these trucks, basically, you cannot do any of your own service. You can't even change your own brakes. Only the dealers have access to the software that allows you to be able to repair the vehicle. Next slide. And so our ability to repair things mechanically or electronically is constrained already. I mean, it's one thing, like the Fruit phone company actually developed this pentalobe screw, a special 5-pointed screw for the outside of the case to keep you from being able to get inside to do something as simple as replace the battery, right? And so so there's design choices that people are making to thwart repair. And just that's one part. Mechanically or operationally, that's one thing to be able to fix it. Next slide. Uh-oh, my slide's gone.
Yeah, it's okay.
I had this thing all dialed in.
Technology, man. I think we're proving a point
Okay.
here.
Right.
Not the brand.
Okay, but the latest Apple iPhones have internal components that are cryptographically serialized to that specific instance of the phone. What that means is that even if you had a broken donor phone that you could try to swap apart from that phone into your broken phone, it will not work. Apple is the only person at this point that has that serialization to allow for it. So that totally thwarts the ability for third-party repair. Next slide. All right, here's the hopeful future part, and this is the vision part I'm going to convey. So right now, sophisticated electronic circuit boards like that one are made in far-off, remote cities like the one on the right. But imagine an alternative future, which I think we need for the coming future circular economy, where most things that we consume are designed, built, serviced, and maintained in a local service area using locally available tools, materials, processes, and services. All right. It's early days, but let's go to the next slide on that. Also imagine that we have all this cool stuff in digitally informed design and this democratization of advanced manufacturing, which allows for sophisticated parts and sophisticated design that used to be only the purview of multinational corporations and defense contractors, is now available locally. And it's early days still. Yeah, so like in these two examples, these are the new rims for the new Volkswagen microbus, and that's a rear suspension for a motorcycle. And you basically, you put in the parameters and the computer designs the part. And decides where it needs to be strong and where it needs to not be strong, and basically optimizes it. I think it's really cool that these kind of look organic in their design. Next slide. And then this idea that everything has a digital twin. So basically for everything that we have in our lives, there's this alternative digital part component for it. So if you had a broken part in your toaster, you have you have the file for that. You could send that off to some local factory to manufacture you a new part that you could snap in, and keep going. Keep going to the next slide. And this is an example of a desktop circuit board maker. And yeah, it's early days. It can't make hundreds of thousands of them at a time or something. But imagine that our future is really about mass customization and manufacturing on demand, that we don't make anything, we don't bring anything into our built world until the need for it has been determined. So they're not making tens of thousands of toasters overseas. You want a toaster, you press enter, buy, or send on your computer, and a digital file propagates through your local area to these local microfactories that make all the constituent parts. And it's either assembled by someone or it's brought to you to be assembled, and it's your toaster. It matches your kitchen decor perfectly. It starts on the defrost bagel setting automatically because that's what you always use first thing in the morning. And if any part breaks, like I said earlier, you just print out that file and it comes back and snaps in, and hopefully continuous integration has been applied to that part so that it's a better part than the part that broke the first time around. So we're actually improving things in our built world as they go forward. Next slide. And that's why we hold Fix-It clinics in conjunction with colleges and universities to teach the next generation of practitioners, of engineers and designers how to design for durability, maintainability, serviceability, repairability alongside design for manufacturing. And what better way to do that than to interrogate the things in our built world now, to say, oh, this part and this kind of broke toaster oven always breaks again and again and again. How can we improve it and make it better? What would it take for us to be able to source as much as possible of this toaster in New England or Northern California right now? And how could we make it over time so that more and more and more of the toaster could be sourced locally rather than coming from some remote place? Next slide. Okay, so the FTC is interested. There actually are existing laws. It was a mass magnetism law from the 1980s that the FTC is responsible for enforcing that says that manufacturers have to provide this sort of information, but it's been very lightly enforced. We just submitted 60,000 signatures to them to say, hey guys, you have this power. We'd like to see you exercise it. Next slide. This is kind of the funny example. So every McDonald's in the United States has a McFlurry machine. If you're a McDonald's franchisee, you have to buy that McFlurry machine from a company called Taylor. Taylor makes a terrible machine. At any given point, 20% of the McFlurry machines at McDonald's around the United States are out of service, and Taylor forces you to get their service people in to fix it. And what's happened is that a third-party company came up and said, oh, wait a minute, we can plug this thing into the side of the machine. It will give the franchisee or the manager on duty all sorts of information about what's broken so that they can fix it and not wait for the Taylor service. Taylor and McDonald's conspired to run that company out of business. So the FTC is involved in that. But next slide, we'll go. And so the White House knows. So in my conversations with the Office of Economic Advisors, brag a little bit, they understand that small and medium-sized business is the engine of innovation of the American economy, and that maybe we have ceded too much power to the large corporations through intellectual property, copyright, and trademark law. And this ability to repair our stuff, this ability to tinker, and that ability to allow for us to look for improvements that would make the device better for us, that we may need to push the needle back over that way a little. It's early days still, and honestly, I think that they can't talk about this too much because of the large Democratic donors who are in the tech industry. But okay, next slide. And in California, we just passed the right to repair law, goes into effect July 1st. The wonderful Nick Lapis from Californians Against Waste will be presenting on that this afternoon, so I'll move to the next slide. So there's this idea of repair being a militant or revolutionary act. That somehow it's like something that, but honestly, I really feel like we all are curious about the world around us and the things that in it that we, certainly the things that we rely on in it, and that, you know, we shouldn't think of it quite that way. Next slide. So that if you're 16 or 16, not only should you be able to repair your own phone, but it should be easy to repair it. Next slide. So we can have less of this kind of mindless churn going on. Next slide. And more of this going on. I mean, she's empowered, she's enabled, she's self-actualized. She's everything that we want and need for our shared future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wow. I think you had us, yes, very captivated. I think I can't get the phrase the democratization of advanced manufacturing out of my head. So we will now, if Dr. Leslie is ready online, we will switch gears to looking at what happens when used batteries are shipped to an African country and how do we monitor the quality of that. Dr. Leslie, you have the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and good evening from here. Just want to be sure you can hear me.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Could you verify that you're speaking closely to your microphone? We're having a little trouble hearing you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
That's better. All right. Thank you so much. And let me just thank you for inviting me to this forum to share some of our experience with regards to imported batteries to Nigeria from the developed countries, and to also share some of our experiences as regards to challenges we face on some of these issues. I think an introduction has been made already, so I will just move to the next slide. Fortunately, it's not moving. Okay. Well, a little bit about my organization. We are a professional non-governmental organization, and we basically conduct research to inform policy action on the ground in Nigeria, and we are more or less following different multilateral environmental agreements like Basel Convention, Rotterdam Convention, and Minamata and all that. So we basically advocate around issues of chemicals and the waste cluster. Just to say that the aspect of, the ICT, basically, as you all know, is transforming the world into a global village, and Nigeria is having a kind of bandwagon effect on this. We know how important the ICT world has been. The last speaker has just made a very interesting presentation of the entire life cycle approach, and Nigeria has been undergoing rapid advancement in the ICT. Of course, that's not without some challenges, because as important as the ICT revolution is, as well as the explosion, it comes with quite a lot of challenges. And that's the subject matter of today, which I need to share the Nigerian experience, which of course is also the African experience on importation of second-hand use and mobile phones. Even though the subject matter is strictly on batteries, but I will be generally from the experience of e-waste, infiltrating Nigeria, I will be sharing some experience in that regard. Just to also say that, a lot of Africans, and by extension Nigerian, depends on second-hand products, because less than 20% of Nigerians, Africans, can hardly afford the brand new products. And that's why you see the product the last speaker just shared on the screen. Virtually every sector, the cyber cafe, the educational institutions, the banks, the small businesses, everyone is now totally dependent on some of these products, especially the second hand or the used one. So that's why there is continuous movement or shipment from the developed country because of non-affordability of these products in this part of the world. However, this comes with a dark side, because some of these products, shelf life, they end up quickly increasing the volume of e-waste in the environment. So I'm going to be speaking around the entire challenge of e-waste with some experiences on lithium-ion batteries, littering here and there, which do not have any serious management regime in place in this part of the world. And also, we have accumulation of obsolete computers and phones, which are generated everywhere. And the recycling plants are not so much in place. We also lack regulatory infrastructure to be able to manage these products in an environmentally sound way. So the impact of this is that we have quite a lot of impact on environment, human health, and of course, again, just like some of the last speakers talked about in terms of impact on vulnerable people, women and children, but in most cases, you find the children, this value chain aspect of collection and management. The key issues I would like to look at is issues around imports, whether it's legal or illegal, then issues of collections, inadequacy of collections, and lack of infrastructure I talked about in terms of recycling, which are just not in place. Very few recyclers are known to have infrastructure to be able to manage the huge gamut of e-waste that comes into the country. Then you also talk about the policy and legislative framework.
I'm so sorry, Dr. Leslie. Something happened with the connection, and we very much, you have us captivated, and we want to hear you, but the audio dropped. If you
I'm
could,
sorry.
on this slide, yes.
I'm sure it's part of the ICT challenge we have in this part of the world.
Live. Absolutely live. Thank you.
So
It's better.
I'm sorry. You are going to be hearing me fade off from time to time because sometimes the networks might not be as strong as we expect. So can you hear me right now? Can you hear me?
Yes, this is better. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so with specific reference to the flows of e-waste and basically imports, which is where I want to dwell, is to say that Nigeria, we of course in this part of the world, particularly in the West African coast, Nigeria is a very large country, and because of that, huge volumes, huge quantities of used and new electrical and electronic materials or e-waste, electrical materials are imported into the country, and some of them come in through illegal means, while some, like I mentioned earlier, come through the legal route. However, I'm trying to refer to a very old statistics of 2010 import statistics. It shows that there's equal number of both new and unused one. And today, perhaps if new studies carried out, we should be seeing at least a differential. But with reference to another national study on people imports that was carried out by some other expert in 2021, it shows that 50% to 70% of all imports are used electrical and electronic equipment, while 30% of them, of these used imported ones, are non-functioning. So the question is, if they are not functioning, where do they end? They end up in the dump sites, in the streets, where they impact the environment and generally public health. If the table here, and just give a quick snapshot of a comparison between the volume of e-waste generated in Nigeria compared to other West African countries. So it is really huge in the case of Nigeria. But precisely, the e-waste component we're talking about here are components that result from refrigerators, cell phones, TV and computer monitors, washing machines, computers. So it's not a surprise. Most of you all in the developed world, when you use some of this, I remember when I was sometime in the UK, some of these things, you just find them, you bring them out of your home, and just, not that they are really faulty, but maybe just because you've used it over a period of time, or you just want a change, So you can just imagine that when that is done, it definitely finds its way into the developing countries. And it's basically in this case with cell phones and computer, where you have lithium-ion battery. It is much important, it's more significant in case of Nigeria, because we do not even have the management capability. The institutional framework for managing batteries, particularly lithium-ion batteries, is very, very weak. Now, in terms of importation, three main routes: the seaports, which is common to every country, the airports, And of course, land border. Again, you know, the West Africa coast, we have very porous borders. So it is almost difficult, you know, to be able to monitor efficiently what comes into this country. Then when you talk about the seaports, the main seaports that comes into the country, what is the capacity? And I'm going to show in the next picture. Yeah, in this picture, you will see the importation of new and used EEs through the seaport. One of the major seaports we have in Lagos is the Tinkan ports. They are packaged in this way. The upper ones are the ones that are new products, packaged in cartons, yes, with all the labels and all the details in it. But down below here, you see the used ones that are just commingled, you know, without any clear labeling or identification. And this is the way all your used products, which you discard in Europe, in the US, and most part of the world, the developed world, are packed in these containerized 40-feet containers and shipped to developing countries. Now, when they get to the seaport, what happens? These are men of the customs. Most of them are not well-trained. When I say not well-trained, yes, they might be well-trained in the aspect of income generation. But in terms of the components, identifying the components, whether they are end of life or not, they don't have the capacity to be able to, and they don't even have the equipment to be able to test, to know whether, so all they just do, they open a container, have a look at one or two of them, and they clear the goods, and the goods find themselves right in the streets, in the community. This other picture is an inspection of goods at semi-border. That is talking of land imports. Now, you can see how ruddy this is, and this is one of our main inspection points. You can better imagine what goes on in this kind of location. It's a case of the highest bidder. So most of the time, they don't have sufficient equipment. So you see quite a lot of these loopholes are the main challenges through which e-waste infiltrates the developed world, the developing country like Nigeria. And here, like I said initially, infrastructure and capacity is very, very weak. Let's see the trade here. Who are the culprits? Known and suspected routes of e-waste dumping. Because the question here is an issue of dumping. Because most of these products, which are seen to be end of life, when they come in, they are either not working, half of them, like I showed in the statistics, or which I'm going to show eventually, they are neither working nor, you know, maybe they just work for a few hours or a few days or months and they pack up. And eventually what happened? They find themselves into the hands of artisans or those who are like scavengers who break them open to extract the precious metals, you know, copper wire and all that. And after that, what happens to the other part, especially the lithium-ion batteries in phones? So products comes in from US, from the EU. Those are the main known sources. Japan, and in case of Nigeria, most of our products are received from the US and the European Union. The white, you can see the white dots there. Then the red dots are the destinations, or what I'll call the recipients. Maybe in the next slide, it can be much clearer. So you see the US and the EU and all the dumping happening in the developing world, of which Nigeria is a major recipient, and huge volumes. By the time we do a new statistics for this year, which I think is going to be very informative, then we'll be able to know, compared to the previous statistical data we have, how much of dumping is happening in Nigeria. Of course, just schematically showing the value chain here, life cycle of the EE, when it's ported, when it's consumed, collected. Of course, there are some elements of refurbishing going on, dismantling, but just like the second last speaker mentioned, rudimentary kind of activities, which do not follow environmentally sound practice. All what they're interested is they want to recover the lead and recover the copper. And what happened to the other product? For example, the lithium component, in case of battery, they find themselves in the dump sites. And the last speaker was showing an example of fire, resulting from lithium batteries. So most of the time, the dump sites are, littered, or you see fire burning in the entire dump sites. And there's additionally, apart from underground pollution, you experience quite a lot of air pollution in the entire vicinity. Even in a city like Lagos, it's not safe. It's not safe from this. Yeah, so that's what I try to paint: the potential of used electronics. Some are reusable, some are junks, some are recyclable, but the percentage, as I showed earlier, of those that are junks that find their way into the dump site are almost like higher, 50 to 70% in most cases, from different assessments that have been done. Some of the reusable are sold. The ones that are serviceable are serviceable. The ones that are not serviceable, or some are stored. Some are disposed of in different parts, either in open dumps or surface water. But of course, we do understand now that some regulations are becoming stiffer, and it's no longer as bad as it used to be, because we have an agency of government now that is up to its billing and trying to regulate some of this product. But of course, there's quite a lot of hoarding going on. For every average person, you have damaged or old phones, computer, and all that in our homes. And because you don't have any, no value after that, you don't even know where to take it to for either recycling or for refurbishing. So some of these things just find their ways into the open dump site, because there's no sanitary landfill anywhere in Nigeria. The pictures you're seeing as well is just on the top right side is the Nigerian Ports Authority, where most of the shipment comes in. On the right-hand side, you see how used EEs are displayed in an open market, and bidders, or anybody who can afford, or merchants who are into wholesale, in some cases, come here to buy. Then you can see down below a man trying to break some of the EEs, trying to extract precious metals, like I talked about earlier. No hand gloves, no coverall, no protective PPEs. Then you can see on the right-hand side some of the waste materials being burnt, wires and all that, releasing different hazardous chemicals, dioxins and furans. You can see a young child running around the fire, trying to, this most cases are common sites, which makes it very hazardous practice. There are just a reflection of some retrospective contexts. Basel Action Network have conducted many studies in Nigeria. An estimated 5 million personal computers are imported annually. And out of this, 25 to 75% of the imported second-hand computers are unusable. They are actually junks. So what happens? Just they are non-functional, and they're also irreparable most of the time. So this is a huge challenge. Of course, most of them come as charity. Of course, this is a small proportion, apart from the ones that are for commercial, purpose, or made importers import them for business. You have the ones that come as for charity to organization, or as donations to institutions as well. And when they are donated to schools, universities, orphanage homes, you find out that about 20 to 80% are actually not functioning, and they are not repairable. with regards to our experience on lithium-ion specific, lithium-ion batteries end of life, we, in 2002, collaborated with Oko Institute in Germany under the Prevent Waste Alliance, and we carried out a e-waste compensation model program in Nigeria. The focus was on lithium-ion batteries and flat screens, because regulatory framework didn't quite cover, and EPRO frameworks didn't quite cover this sector. So we wanted to see how, through a waste compensation model, how this can be exported, about 20 tons exported by and be sold back to international brands and users abroad. Well, our finding, just basic finding, is clear on this in the sense that reuse and repurposing are also conducted. We found out that, well, quite a lot of local repair shops are available that does quite a lot of this work at very low prices as well. And most importantly, the export of unprocessed lithium battery is currently difficult. So it means that continuous accumulation is the order of the day. Even if it's possible, the legal framework, very intransparent business atmosphere also don't enable this to happen. Therefore, most importantly, and very important point, is the cost of collection, pre-processing, handling, and storage. At the end of the day, we find that it was quite economically not very viable venture for anybody to be engaged in. Just to say that although we, in terms of standards, we do have the institutional framework that manages, that are responsible to this. We have a national policy, because as significant as the e-waste issue is in Nigeria, just like some of you know in the case of Ghana, there is a regulatory framework, there's a policy framework in place to manage battery. But how effective are these is a huge challenge. There are PROs. In Nigeria, we have 2 PROs, the Association of Responsible Battery Recycling, and another one on e-waste, EPRON, E-Waste Producers Responsible Organization of Nigeria. But again, like we talked about, there are a lot of challenges ranging from collection to enforcement of regulations, to lack of awareness by the informal sector, insufficient infrastructure, and all that to be able to do the needful, notwithstanding that Nigeria is party to the Basel Convention. So generally, challenges for managing this sector, there is no commercial recycling process for. This is from a global perspective to local, basically. There is no recycling process for lithium-ion battery at 100% resource recovery. It was like we found in the case of paper, glass, and other sector. The challenge is more of economics than, just like I mentioned in our own pilot project, than technical. Some effort has been channeled to repurpose these high voltage flammable electric vehicle batteries for solar energy. Again, even though in the case of Nigeria, which is same for most other African countries, our experience in EVs is still emerging, which I will talk about in the next slide. Is still going to follow the same kind of experience challenge that we have with regards to the lithium-ion battery. So ultimately, funding lithium-ion battery recycling or resource recovery will require financial compensation model, which developing economies cannot afford. Then in terms of
Dr. Leslie, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but you are sharing, incredibly valuable and voluminous information. And so could we ask you to possibly wrap
conclusion?
Up? Yes, thank you so much.
In a wrap up quickly. So there are institutions in place in terms of standards, none for EVs, batteries. It's just an emerging sector. There are different initiatives emerging for EV technology. There's already some EV vehicles being imported, but there's no regulatory framework in place to be able to manage. So we are already envisaging the same infiltration and accumulation of EV batteries, just like we already have in lithium-ion batteries and other used lead-acid recycling batteries like my other speakers mentioned. Of course, the reasons due to which I have already talked about, no effective take-back programs for these products, not lack of cautiousness on e-waste toxicity, and so on, like I mentioned. Quite a lot of challenges in terms of infrastructure, legislation, and all that I talked about. And lastly, just to say that another major challenge is that of non-compliance in terms of most of the countries exporting to Nigeria are not they haven't ratified Basel Convention, and so they make the developing countries a dumping ground. My recommendation to both the industry and the regulators is that take back responsibility from any party that imports or distributes original products as soon as it becomes e-waste in a country is imminent. That's the way to go. We should embrace take-back models, then strengthen EPRs. Then, of course, regulators have to be up to their billings in terms of encouraging best practice, strict enforcement. Then, of course, we want to encourage pilot projects, activities that supports sustainable collection, repair, refurbishment, because the manpower is there and the enabling environment to enable dismantling, recycling, and proper collection of these waste products are there. But of course, the economics part of it remains a challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. I can't help but be struck by one of your slides in particular, seeing the parallels between just how much the impacts of mining are concentrated in certain geographies. And we see a similarity with the impacts of the legal and illegal waste streams and dumping of e-waste impacting certain countries in particular. We have run a bit over time. I think we will do a quick Q&A, taking some questions from the room, some questions from Zoom, and then we will break for lunch. And this afternoon, we will make it a priority to provide space for more interactive discussion among the participants now that we have all of this richness of information. So do we have a question on Zoom? We could prioritize Zoom first and then turn to questions in the room. Thank you.
All right, so this is a question from Galina Angarova, her from the Surge Coalition. She says, thank you for your presentation, Jeff. How can we coordinate better on the front end of the supply chain and at the end of the battery life cycle for a truly just transition? And I am talking about indigenous and other affected communities and communities who are exposed to hazardous materials at the end of the cycle.
Should we collect a few questions? Is that maybe slightly, is there another one? Yep.
Sebastian, would you be willing to say your question in the chat or out loud?
I can say it out loud really quickly. If essentially the presentations we got were an overview of how people in the informal economy working in e-waste sustain themselves off of this dangerous industry, but that more extended producer responsibility, labeling, industry regulation, et cetera, is needed. What advantages are there to formalizing the waste economy with regulations versus keeping it more informal with the right to repair and with greater protections for workers?
And then are there any questions in the room? Can we collect maybe one or two more? If you have any, or if fatigue has set into overload, information overload. Yes, Meg.
This is maybe following on to the question that was just asked, but I'm curious if there are examples of solutions that have brought along the people who are currently handling those materials as opposed to, because I could see the risk of designing a system where it's all just managed kind of by the corporation, sort of like we have here. So I'm wondering if there are positive examples where those people are still involved in the management after a new system has been introduced.
Thank you. I think we can turn now to Jeff and the others to take those questions. Thanks.
Yeah. So thanks for the questions. So for the first question with Galina, like at the end of the day, front and the front end of the supply chain will always be influenced by a lot of corporate control. I think it was touched on a while ago with regard to intellectual property rights. Like these corporations are not exactly willing to give up what gives them an edge, with their competitors. But at the same time, right, it does provide an opportunity to influence OEMs. If we lobby to these big corporations, you know, uh, that will have some sort of like a net effect, hopefully, to OEMs who actually do produce a lot of these cheaper versions of batteries that proliferate here in the global south. But again, the problem is really the intellectual property rights. So one possible way of with this is to really gain access to those spaces where these technologies are being talked about. So that includes maybe really rich engagements with academe that are at the forefront of battery redesign. That's very important. But at the end of the day, um, what remains is really that sense of corporate control, and I think that dovetails well to the back end, right, of end of life management. You know, at the end of the day, these corporations, sad to say, especially here in the global south, they get away with everything. And even in terms of EPR, the lobbying is strong with government officials from the industry. And they sort of package it as some sort of CSR on their part, which is of course right with greenwashing, right? So that's one, right? But also there's an opportunity on the back end to ensure a truly just transition, right? To um, probably frame these issues in terms of human rights. We know that business and human rights is a huge framing in the UN right now, and this is actually language that is slowly being adopted by some businesses. Of course, they do end up using this again for their own gain, but at the same time, it is an opportunity, right? So I think there really is value in framing these discussion in terms of human rights and business. But at the end of the day, all of these things are really the backbone of this is really strong campaigning for both corporate level and community level. I think one thing that was mentioned a while ago, and I was pretty impressed with the presentation of Fix It Clinic, because it was totally ingenious. Like actually like having a lot of these efforts on the ground to have deeper appreciation of the right repair, right? Which isn't usually talked about actually, especially here in the global south. So really a combination of factors I think would have this effect of pushing having a good system for a truly just transition to take place.
Thank you, Jeff. Don't know, Peter, do you want to maybe take a stab at the solutions question that Meg asked, or is there another question that you might feel you could speak to?
So sorry, remind me. I heard
Yes.
the question, but I wasn't sure how I could.
Right. So the question was, are there examples of solutions from people who are handling the materials? Are there positive solutions from people who are involved with management after a particular system is introduced?
I'd say we're at this inflection point right now because of what I mentioned with the Apple parts pairing, where if that holds, then our real ability to fix things will be totally in their hands and not ours. What is hopeful in the whole Fix It Clinic project is this idea that people it doesn't take a lot. There is a lot in our built world now that is easily fixable if you just give people permission that it's okay to open up their broken stuff. And that's really fundamentally the simple thing that we try to do at every event.
Thank you, Peter. And then Dr. Leslie, I don't know if I could invite you maybe to speak from your perspective on Sebastian's question of what advantages that there are for formalizing the waste economy rather than keeping the right to repair for waste workers. If Dr. Leslie is still online. Not sure. Maybe there was a question that came in while we're waiting, a question that came in from Ellie on the Zoom chat for Meg, which is, what would a deliberate effort to support reuse or repurposing look like in conjunction with recycled content requirements and policies? I think she was responding to your invitation for questions on the trade-offs.
Sure. So what I was getting at there is that we have a lot of, I think, really important policy that has recently been passed regarding mineral sourcing requirements and also investing quite a lot of money in domestic recycling and manufacturing capacity. And that is potentially driving these batteries that have nickel and cobalt that are valuable towards recycling without an equal focus on reuse and repurposing. And particularly when you think about how the recycling companies and more so the producers are these large established companies that they have a staff who can attend and lobby and inform policy. Reuse and repurposing are these smaller independent operations, and they're kind of left out of the conversations when those policies are getting formed. So I think just having more focus on that, and then more support for the diagnostics and as well as collection and sorting capacity in conjunction with the policies that we have now on material recovery and recycling would be really helpful.
Thanks, Meg. We have more questions coming in. We will have more opportunities to address them. I do want to just give one more opportunity to Dr. Leslie or Jeff to answer, that question about, thinking about formalizing the waste economy or keeping the right to repair for waste workers.
If Dr. Leslie isn't there, I can take a stab at the question. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. Great.
Yeah, so that's an interesting framing of the question, because that actually happened in China. In China, what they did was to actually kind of like formalize the recycling economy there for EV battery waste, right? But the moment they did, right, a lot of these informal recyclers suddenly appeared, and now the problem is that these white recyclers, they call it white recyclers, uh, uh, are actually losing ground in getting, in recovering EV batteries. And the wildcat recyclers, the black recyclers, they call it white and black for some reason, uh, they are the ones that are actually gaining a lot of market share when it comes to battery recycling. So, so formalizing these systems actually can be a double-edged sword to some degree, because there will always be instances, right, where there would be spaces that will be filled up, right, with these informal sector actors, right? So I think what also that points to, right, is that, um, and I think this was touched on by Dr. Leslie a while ago. It's really an issue of the market, right? And I really liked his suggestion of having financial compensation models as a way to kind of like address this glut of waste. Because again, like if it's always just this cycle of regulation, deregulation, and like there will always be space, right? For informal actors to come in, right? So I think there needs to be a radical rethinking of the actual economics of scale when it comes to end of life management for EV battery waste.
Thank you so much, Jeff. We, I think, are going to wrap it up on that note and go to a lunch break. Jeff, thank you, and let's give a round of applause to Peter. I hope you catch up on the lost sleep. We're so grateful, Jeff. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much.
And then, so here in the room and on Zoom, we will try to start again, picking it back up on schedule at 12:55. So